Hello, welcome to everyone in the United States and around the world. This is Love, Truth, and Peace. I am your host, Dr. Melody Harris Barrow, coming to you live from Miami. And people with the knowledge and tools they need to improve, create, build, prosper, and change their environment so that they can effectively lead to a better future. Today's topic is part two, the correctional system and its economics. But today we added the court system and the police department. And to discuss, I would like to introduce my co-host, Dr. Marcellus Hall, and our special guest today, Professor Louis Marshall, former superintendent of Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York. And also, Mr. Jakari Walker, he's a prosecutor, and Mr. Valdi Larch, retired former police officer of New York City, and Eric Davis, also retired officer in Chicago. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Welcome.
I am so excited to have all of you here today. Why? Because most of you, most of you are retired veterans of the police department, correctional facility, and also we have Jakari Walker, he's the prosecutor. I want to start off this show by saying thank you for coming on the show, because this is a topic that needs to be discussed here in the United States, and there's so many people tuned in from around the world the last time and was saying that they are having the same problems in their country. But I want to start off today with Eric Davis, former police officer in Chicago. And I'm going to make a general question because there's so much happening in Chicago. But I want to start off by, in the news, this is all we hear. Someone was killed. 100 people was killed for the weekend. 50 people were killed on the weekend. We need to know what's happening in Chicago. That's a general question, but you can pinpoint as to what is really happening in Chicago.
Well, what's been going on in Chicago has actually been going on in Chicago for about 100 years now. Chicago is a very segregated city, and it's a city of 77 neighborhoods, but it's probably a city that's cut into 4 cities. Some of it is by economics, but most of it is by color and culture. And sadly, where you see most of the violence occurring are in some of the poorest Black and brown communities in the city. And a lot of those neighborhoods have been poor for 50 years. And some of the lack of investments, poor schools, no hope, hopelessness, really what you're hearing in Miami or in New York is the cry of hopelessness. When you have communities like West Garfield Park, where I run my youth organization, and the largest employer of Black men are organized drug street gangs. Mm-hmm. That speaks to an issue. And they've been isolated so long in these poor, hopeless communities that they've given up on even trying to participate in what's considered the mainstream. So they've created this clandestine business, because what you see is not gang activity, it's organized crime, and it's very organized. And you're talking about blocks and corners and open air markets that make $50,000 or $60,000 a day. And these young men still have to buy Pampers. They still have to pay rent. They still have to help their kids with school projects. And it's really a shame that they have had to and have been forced to think that this is the only way that I can participate in this country, which
Yeah.
is on the black market, in the clandestine economy, when it doesn't have to be that way.
Exactly. Exactly. You want to add anything, Marcel, because you have that experience. So tune in. I need you to
Yes.
talk about what you have been through as well. Yes.
All right. Yes. Well, for me personally, always had a very deep connection with Chicago, where I'm from in Tennessee. When we started gang banging activities, actually started around the time I was 13 to 14 years old. And it started with gangs that came in from Chicago. Those were the first gangs that infiltrated the neighborhoods that I lived in, that I grew up in, I was subjugated to. And you definitely seen a transition of that. And even in today, now I work in education and higher education in America, and also work in higher education in England, where I teach at the university. We see the allocation of funding is lacking in comparison to that funding for incarceration centers. The funding for incarceration has went up considerably, about 200%. 200%, I think it is, between 1987 to 2007. But the funding for education only went up 21%. That disparity right there creates a problem for people. That alone, and just the desensitization of what's going on around us, is almost like we've been desensitized to what we're seeing from the school to prison pipeline. That is without a doubt evident, transparent, and cannot be denied. It is irrefutable evidence from the way that people are treated as kids. The first experience with law, I think I was in eighth grade when we started having police officers in our school, but before that, they were just called security guards. So slowly you start seeing a transition to where you were normalized to certain types of behavior and treatment. By the time I was 18 and went into the military, I already felt like I grew up in boot camp. And this is just the mindset of the youth, that what they're experiencing. Some people, myself, I was fortunate. I say fortunate, I'm still here and turned out the way I did. But definitely not fortunate from all that I lost. I lost a lot to the streets and growing up, devastated. My family was devastated by it. But I think this is a huge problem. And I think that a lot of it's being covered up. It has been being covered up. And I, for one, am just glad to have people here from different walks of life, because I really have a lot of questions as to, from your perspective, what's happening and what are some solutions that you think we can do. And I want to say in a decentralized fashion. And I say they decentralized because we all know that one central, movement is just not going to work. The states have individual power for a reason. They govern themselves for a reason. The system's been set up that way since the 1700s. So, I mean, we're all intelligent enough here to know that. So, but what can we do in our own respective areas to get hope? Because it is hopeless. It seems very hopeless.
Did you want to ask a question while you're talking? Why don't we do that now, Mr. Hall?
Okay.
Dr. Hall.
So one of the questions that I had was that in the school to prison pipeline, what is being done on the level of the streets with the law enforcement? What can be done to help change this narrative? Because it went from a legacy, from a fairy tale to somewhat now of an undeniable legacy, just something that people are just, without a doubt, more than likely to inherit.
Okay, who wants to take that question? Who wants to?
Well, I can take half of it.
Okay.
I've been retired now going on 3 years. And what I've noticed is that the departments are not enforcing community policing as when I first started. I believe that police officers ought to establish themselves in the community that they patrol, whereas they would have more direct contact with the community other than a pullover or getting a call of a crime being committed, but to build a relationship where your phone numbers are being exchanged, where the community people, community leaders have your phone number, and have programs where officers can go into schools and talk to young people, kind of prepare them,
Mhm.
because the respect for police officers right now is not there. And I remember when I was on patrol, we had a relationship with the community. Not everybody, because that's just nature. Whereas the people in the community, we've established a relationship where they would give us information on certain things. But if they don't have that confidence in you, they're not going to give you that information. So um, I believe that we need to establish more of a community relation. It's not looking up to the police, but being on a partnership basis and start from there.
Well, you're saying to build a community relations, but how long are we going to talk about building that community relations? And for example, because I lived in the city of Chicago for over 30 years, and I spent a lot of time visiting school, and that's how I think I met Eric. And you guys had well, Eric is sings and stuff, so he would go to the schools, rapper or whatever he was doing. But it was a well-known group in the city of Chicago, and he's been doing this for years. He didn't just started working with the youth. I've been working with the youth, so we cross. And these programs that I've seen that is coming from the city are not programs that are reaching directly to the youth in terms of teaching them about business, teaching them quality things that they need to survive. What I've seen is that they would tell them what you can do, but they're not providing the resources for them to do the things that they need to do. Most of the time, what we'll see is the military come to the school and grab these kids, and that next thing you know, they're in the Air Force, they're in the Marine. This is what I've seen. This is my experience. I'm not talking about everybody else's experience, but this is my experience. So what I'm saying is the community involvement with the police department, involved with the school system or the community, we're not really getting to the nitty gritty of helping our children. And this is why our children are spending so much time selling drugs, and doing the things that they are doing. Because I always say, okay, you're selling a product, which is cocaine, heroin, whatever, but I want to present something else to you, because these young people have talents. If a young man can sell drugs, he's not only an economist, but he's a neighborhood security. He is doing all the things that a businessman can do. The thing is that he's selling the wrong product, but that is the only product that has been introduced to him.
Yeah.
So can you step in, Jakari, and tell us, the amount of young people that are coming through your department as a prosecutor, and why?
Certainly. Well, I personally have dealt with the youth in the criminal justice system. A few months ago, I was in our juvenile division where I prosecuted juvenile cases. And I can say that I have firsthand knowledge of what actually goes on in a courtroom as it pertains to our youth. And speaking to the prison, the school to prison pipeline, there are a wealth of different programs in place in the jurisdiction where I practice that have been implemented to sever that pipeline. In the jurisdiction where I practice, there's something called the Juvenile alternative services sanctions. And what that basically does is once a juvenile commits a crime, let's say theft or a trespass, they're picked up by the local police department. They immediately go to a center where they are assessed by professionals. They do a mental health evaluation, psychological exam, and they pretty much dive into that youth's background, the environment that they grew up in, and they create a packet that is then submitted to the state attorney's office so that the prosecutors handling that case can review that file and make a determination as to what needs to be done with that child. 40, 50 years ago, that wasn't the case. You committed a crime as a juvenile, you go to jail, and that's the end of it. That's how you were introduced to the criminal justice system. Thankfully, and fortunately, that's not the case anymore. There are several programs that are set up to pretty much take these youth out of the criminal justice system and make sure that they have a trade moving forward, make sure that they have a mentor, make sure that they're going to school when they are supposed to and getting decent grades so that they can become a productive member of society. We all make mistakes. We all may fall by the wayside at times, but there are programs in place to try to prevent that. And when they do end up in the criminal justice system as a first-time offender or a second-time offender, they are immediately teamed up with a mentor. And when I was in the juvenile division, I was fortunate enough to be in front of a judge that actually cared about the youth. He would make sure that they had everything that they needed to get out of that situation and become a productive member of society. That is making sure they're partnering with a mentor. That mentor could be someone at their school. It could be someone in the state attorney's office. It could be another judge. He would also make sure that if they weren't interested in school or they felt as though they couldn't be, school wasn't for them, he would partner them up with someone who could possibly draw out of them a trade. Are they interested in plumbing? Are they interested in mechanical work? And they would have to report to the court on a weekly or bi-weekly basis and pretty much give a report. This is what I've been doing over the last 2 weeks. And that type of system was in place for 3 months, 6 months, sometimes a year. And at the end of that program, if they did well, that case would be dismissed. So that is one of the things that has been in place to try to sever that school to prison pipeline issue that we've seen so frequently lately.
Right.
Hey, Melita, I agree that those things that Brother Walker spoke about are happening. The issue that I have with it is that those aren't the issues that Brother Walker and that system should be dealing with. It shouldn't be the police. We know that poor communities need these services before they even get into the system.
Yeah.
And that is the real issue. And when I was policing in Cabrini Green and the Robert Taylor homes, I mean, I was policing poverty. And here's the real issue with the system, the whole system. The whole system is about statistics. Yes. You know, it's about data. And good work that's preventative. As a police officer, there was no box for me to check off. They want to know, how many tickets did you write? How many arrests did you have? How many stops did you make? How many contact cards do you have? There are boxes for that. So they can have that data and those numbers to tell people. Prosecutors are generally told, you know, their success is geared on how many prosecutions did you have? What's your prosecution rate? But we have to say, isn't it a success if we don't have kids that go into the system? Isn't it a success if we can keep parents as the police of their homes, as the prosecutor in their home, keeping their family, that we're getting people out of poverty? Because realistically, what I worked for 27 years as a police officer, I didn't have to be a great detective. It didn't take me long to figure out kids that are extremely poor in extremely tough circumstances are going to take risk.
Yes. That's I wanna follow up behind that to the prosecutor and then back to the brother, because first of all, let me say this. Anything I address, I'm addressing to the topic and not to anybody personally. And I just want to put that out there because I didn't get a chance to speak to anybody personally yet. So I just want to make sure we understood. Because a couple things. For number one, we talk about the mentorship program that the prosecutor was talking about, which is great. However, as the gentleman said, these things are already happening in our lives before we even get there. The evaluations that you have once somebody's been picked up. Where's the evaluation in the schools before a child even gets picked up?
Yes.
Before I had a run in with the police, first time I had a run in with the police, I was 14. The first time I seen somebody get killed in front of me, I was 10. Yeah. So you don't think I was traumatized already?
Absolutely.
You understand what I'm saying? So I get that they have these programs, and I don't have a problem with that. That's great. But it's too late already. By the time the kid's picked up, he's picked up for a reason. He's picked up because he's already been conditioned psychologically, emotionally, spiritually to a certain way of life. By that time, it's too late.
Yeah.
And then even with the mentors that you assign them, what mentor are you signing them? Because you give me a judge, but then when I go back home to my neighborhood, the judge is the enemy. So how much do you think that really sits in and resonates with me? You understand what I'm saying? So, in education, what do? We apply practice that's best to the individual needs of that specific learner in a way that they best decipher, download, process, digest, and communicate that information through self-identification. So you can give me a mentor that's telling me all the things that's good in the world, but if I can't identify with you,
that's right. Yes.
I'm not listening to you. You understand what I'm saying? And I think everybody can say that. Everyone can say that. So, it's great what he's saying, but I still just think that's too late. And I just think that we need an intervention at a younger stage. We're already traumatized before we get into the schools.
Right.
So that relationship with the police, as he said, it is essential. It is essential to us because we're hurting. A lot of us don't want to grow up that way. I got 6 college degrees. I live a great life. And guess what? I still have dreams to this day of everything I've witnessed growing up.
Yeah.
There is no healing for that.
Right.
And I don't live there. I don't live there anymore. I go sit up here and teach in front of a bunch of kids at a university from over 20 different countries amongst other professors. But when I go home and I'm by myself at night, I don't see their face. I see the faces of the friends I've lost or the family I lost. That's what I see.
And there's a cycle as well. Do you want to jump in, Mr. Marshall?
Well,
yes.
We're looking at different aspects here. It started off with Chicago, and for the experiences that Officer
Eric Davis.
Experiences in Chicago definitely it transcends what most of us would probably have ever experienced in certain communities. Some of that I've seen it in my growing up from where I came from, a little city in Cologne, but not the extent of what you experienced. His situation is more a topic of the socioeconomic, the lack of proper socioeconomic building in that community to make it more viable for people to sustain themselves. But going back to what we were looking at with the police departments, and Brother Lurchie said that when he started, they were more community oriented. And obviously what has happened is that particular discipline has changed radically. And I mentioned it on yesterday in our interaction. 3 different types of police officers in the system, and they have always been. But now it has escalated to a higher level. You have your police officer, this is a social agent, community officer. That's Brother Lurchie's description. That's Brother Eric's description. They are social agent, community officers. They want to talk to the kids, talk to the community, stop that, behave yourself. Don't go in that direction. What's wrong with you? He's going to communicate. Then you have the law enforcer officer. He's going to give everybody a ticket once they deserve it. He's not negotiating anything. He's not trying to convey a message of improvement or anything of that nature. That's his straight up training. He's going to give tickets. He's going to take you to prison. Then you have your rogue officer, R-O-G-U-E, rogue officer. And both of these gentlemen here know what I'm talking about. We are here to speak truth. The rogue officer is about a 2% in the system. But if his behavior is not arrested earlier, in his career, he is going to permeate his behavior throughout the system and start to recruit more agents that think the way he thinks and behave the way he deserves, that he behaves. The way to control that is in the training. Once that officer completes the training, you should have that officer go to community meetings and talk to people in that community where he's going to be working. And inclusive in the training, you should have one component called inculturation. Inculturation will give officers an opportunity to at least understand some degree about the people they're going to be working with. The other thing that they need is a conflict resolution training, because they're going to be conflict, and officers have to realize, and these two officers know what I'm saying, your most powerful weapon of any law enforcement, parole, probation, correction officer, your most powerful weapon is communication. If you can't communicate, you can diffuse 95% of the problem. You have a few people with idiosyncrasies. That's life. And they come with their own mindset, just like the rogue officer. So now you have them button heads, and he's going to create more negativity for the department. And here we are, we talking more about the negative than the positive, like Brother Lert said yesterday. We should have been talking about all the beautiful things that Eric has done, you have done, but that don't hold any water, because on the other hand, you have the 2% sending people, throwing them to their grave, husband, wife, whoever dies. That becomes more the primary focus rather than dealing with encouragement, motivation, inclusion. We strain away further and further, and now it's more confrontational. Like I said, two things: enculturation and conflict resolution. Those two components help to broaden your scope in terms of how you perceive other people. And to touch on the DA, I have to say, before officers graduate from the academy, the district attorney office should go into the police academy and do a presentation, and it should be entail the following: the 8th Amendment to the Constitution. He should explain that to them, crude and inhuman punishment, excessive bail. These little things have a lot to do with how he's going to go out on that street. So now he realized that the DA is not his so-called pal. They're not pal Walsey. He has a responsibility that says the law prevails. He's supposed to be talking about Civil Rights Act according to the affirmative action to these officers, Civil Rights Act 80 from the 1871 Federal Statute 42. That statute, and you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I'm going a little rapid fire here. 1871. That statute was.
I want Eric to step in, because it looks like Eric wants to say something as well. Go ahead.
Take the drink.
I see Eric jumping out of his chair. So
no. I was taking an opportunity to get an education, but let's be honest. Let's really be honest with this thing. Whether you're in Memphis, whether you're in New York or Chicago or in Panama, there is a different way that police communities of color.
Yes.
I mean, let's call it what it is. It's not even in the training, because all you have to do and all we expect as Black and brown citizens is for you in Cologne to police the same way you do in Bella Vista in Panama City. The same way you do on Michigan Avenue and in Lincoln Park in Chicago, police that way in Inglewood and in West Garfield Park. And police officers know how to treat citizens in those communities.
Exactly.
So is it their training? Is it their home training?
There you go. There you go.
I think there's a combination of.
Or is it the mindset? Is it the mindset?
I'm agreeing. I'm agreeing.
Give Jakari a chance. Go ahead, Jakari. You want to say something?
Yes, I agree with both Mr. Marshall and Mr. Davis as far as training. Yes, as a law enforcement officer, they need to go through certain trainings before they are allowed to engage in road patrol, and they need to understand what constitutional rights are out there for the average citizen. And for the most part, the police agencies that I've worked with, they do have those trainings. They do sit down with the state attorney's office and they go over Fourth Amendment rights. They go over the Eighth Amendment and so on and so forth. But I think what the issue that we oftentimes gloss over is, who is this individual outside of the police agency? Who is this individual once they take off that uniform? That's where the problem is. It's not the uniform or the badge that they put on that makes them want to go after certain individuals and treat them a certain way in certain neighborhoods. No, that's a personal character trait that they have, that they've been harboring with, that they've been pretty much building up their entire lives, whether it be their home training or the environment that they grew up in. And now that they have a badge and a gun and a uniform, they use that to their advantage to release all of that anger and frustration and bias towards those who are most vulnerable to it. So I do think that training is an issue, but there's a deeper issue that we're seeing these days, and it's the individual issue. What is it with this person that causes them to act this way behind this badge and behind this uniform?
Yeah. I agree with 100%, all three. And I have the same training: cultural awareness, conflict resolution. And there's guys sitting next to me have the same training, but the mindset is different. They react to situations differently than the way we would. Okay. And so it's more than what you are trained in the academy or the different training that you go to. It's more than that. It's that personal individual. And that's where a lot of problems are.
Exactly. Marshall, you wanted to say something?
Yes, what I wanted to say is in dealing with officers in general, because we are talking police officers, I handle the ones that are in the system, correction officers. And I've been up north where you don't see much black people, period, unless they're incarcerated. And I've been in that region and had to confront these people on one-on-one. The only advantage I have is my authority, but the wrong color in terms of how they perceive me. My bottom line is this: to some extent, police department or Department of Corrections, the people in charge has to be held accountable. When I was sent to the worst prison in New York State, known as Gladiator School, violence daily, cutting, you had to have a cleanup crew, blood pathogen cleanup almost every day. They asked me if I will go there, and people say, you got to be insane. And I went. The key thing that happened there was, once I arrived, I called the district attorney of the county, sat him down in my office, closed the door with him, and I said, listen, you need to learn what are my rules of engagement. I don't involve in malfeasance. I don't abuse inmates. I don't violate the 8 amendments of the Constitution, cruel and inhuman punishment. If my officers decide to go in that direction, I will probably be the one leading the charge along with the Inspector General office to have them convicted. But I need you to take the same position lawfully, that you are not going to finagle with any of this and give them curry favor and let them continue this behavior that has been displayed. That place was under investigation by even the federal government. In 11 months, it was a different setting. It changed radically. I sat down with the union, told them my position, and talked to the officers one at a time, go to their post and talk to them individually, go to lineup. And I told the captain, the deputy security, and all of my high-ranking people, you have to follow my lead if you're going to keep this job. The advantage I have is I had the blessing of the commissioner. He trusted me because I diffuses the problem in the South Bronx where there was weapons in the prison. And I went there, changed that culture. So now I am in this setting way up north. Nobody hardly look like me unless they're locked up. And I sat down with these people and told them clearly, all bets are off. I am not going to testify on your behalf. When I come in the morning, I see a UI, unusual incident report. If it doesn't seem like it connect, the dots doesn't connect, I'm calling the Inspector General office and you'll be on the investigation. Leaders have to lead. You can't be the chief of police, which unfortunately the one that just got fired in Atlanta, I met with her 2 years. I sat in front of that woman along with Julian Bond's son, Michael Bond. And I tried to give her some direction about what I thought would be feasible. I know respectfully, she didn't go that route. But the bottom line is you cannot say you are in charge. And when you have officers, because you know them, your sergeant give you a report, what's going on with Johnny, who is always in some trouble in the community with young people and citizens. You have to call that person in. You got to put him on the carpet. And if he cannot make any changes, you have to do what is not pleasant, which is you have to try to get him fired. Don't tell me the union's going to stop you. I've been down that road with some of the toughest union in New York. Never lost a case. You can go online and look it up, even in court of law. You know why? All I did was apply the rule. You can't keep dancing around this thing. Well, you know, some are good, some are bad. We all have personalities. But just how we all went to work and we knew that certain behaviors were not going to be condoned, you have to, the leader, I'm talking about the chief of police, he or she should be fired if the officers are running rampant. Who's guarding the asylum? You want to have somebody that takes the responsibility and say, no, is he still in trouble again? How many complaints we have in the community? 7, 8, 9, 10? No. Bring him in. He's going to have to do a balancing act as far as the next move or the next course of action.
Right.
I
have a question. I have a question for the police officers. How does it feel working day in and day out? You're retired now, but you know, when you were active, knowing that drugs, guns, this organized crime that is plaguing the Latin and the Black community, knowing that this is from the top, right? You know that this is from the top. How did you feel knowing that it's from the top and there's not going to be a solution to that problem by every day being out there arresting, I would say, victims, because I call them victims because they're trying to survive, these young people. They can't find a job. So how did you feel as far as doing this work, but knowing that the guns are coming from the outside, the drugs are coming from the outside? Eric, can you put this together for me? Because I know if I was a police officer fighting this every single day, and there was not, it's still happening. Actually, it's gotten worse. We spent 30 years trying to fix something, and it's gotten worse.
Well, you know, Melita, I got on the Chicago Police Department in the mid-'80s. And, you know, we were only really allowed on the job in big numbers starting from about 84 to 95. That's because because we finally got a Black mayor. That job and being a fireman in Chicago wasn't even an option for us up until then. So as a young guy, I was 23 years old when I got on the job. You know, initially, whatever community you go to, you know, you think it's like TV, good guys, bad guys. If they're selling drugs, they're bad guys. And if they have guns, they're bad guys. You know, sociologically, I wasn't thinking so deep then. And once I started to see that it's an ever-ending line of people to take the guy I arrested spot because they're poor. And I saw kids who were aligning themselves with gangs because every Christmas gift they've ever gotten, every birthday gift they've ever gotten, all of their school clothes have come from money that the gangs have extended their families one way or the other. So I started to understand what their loyalty was. And more importantly, coming from the community, I understood why it existed. So now what's different is this. You can't really control the police department from the bottom up. And whether you were in New York or Boston or Chicago or Los Angeles, still the leadership was white. And in many of the cities, it was white Irish. So the theory of how communities were going to be policed, especially when I got on the job, you figure that guy was born in about 1935.
Yes.
So what do you think? Yeah, his mindset is, and who taught him at the dinner table? The guy that taught him at the dinner table was born in 1900. So we came on But now what's changed 30 years since is now that we're starting to get in those leadership positions.
Exactly.
And we can't just get into the position of leadership because you get paid more money. Sadly, you have to lead.
Okay. Amen.
And part of the problem is here in Chicago is that politics plays such a big part. And there are a lot of Black men and women in leadership roles who are puppets.
Yeah.
I'm not going to speak to any of the other cities. They're afraid to make hard decisions. They're afraid to tell truth. And as long as I'm telling truth, and as long as I'm following the rule of law, I'm never worried about anything. If you remember, Mel, when I really got in trouble with the Chicago Police Department, and these brothers may not know, when I really got in trouble with the Chicago Police Department, I set up a treaty with every street gang in Chicago. And the thing that bothered them the most was they thought, how can this young Black boy get all of these gangs to stop shooting at each other? And I'm going to be honest with you. When I went in and spoke to most of these young men and some young women, they told me that no one had ever asked them to stop. And really, they wanted to stop. They just needed somebody to intervene. And I did that because there was a young man named Dantrell Davis that got killed walking to school with his mother. He got shot in a shootout between rival gangs. And that was enough to at least have the conversation.
Right.
And everyone agreed. And I leveraged that to the best advantage of the community because folks live in these communities 24 hours a day. I policed in it 8 hours a day. And if I had the ability to give some information or build a relationship that they couldn't across the street or 5 blocks down, I felt I was obligated to do it. And I did.
Yes.
I just want to say he raises a very good points. I mean, the most heart-shaking thing that he said that really stuck out to me is that, nobody wants to live that way. Nobody wants to live that way, and I'm speaking from experience. I'm speaking from 3 brothers, a cousin, my best friend, over 20 of my childhood friends, all lost to this senselessness, and it's not something that it's not how we want to live. It's not where we want to live, but it's where we got to live. If you want to connect the dots historically, for me, 2 things definitely saved my life. One was poetry and education. And I was never told in high school, middle school, I go to college. I was never told that. I was never talked to about education, and now I lecture and I part with over 4 different universities on 3 continents. But I was never told I could do that. It was never dawned on me that this is what it was possible for me to be. But I'm going to tell you why. Because if you look at our system right now, for example, the marshals, you look at the marshal's badge. What is the purpose of a marshal? Marshal catches people that are running away. They're on the run. They make sure people don't leave. They ain't supposed to go nowhere. What did a marshal do in 1789 when it was instituted? What is on the badge in 1858? The same symbol of what a marshal is today. And what it says on there, it says plantation police, runaway slaves.
Wow.
That's where we're at today.
I didn't know that.
The difference. Oh yes, it's there. Look it up. The difference is that for our generation, what really helps us and why education, I'm telling you from somebody who lived it, who survived it, education is the key.
Yes, sir.
Because when I started having this information presented to me and I became thirsty to find out that there was another way. When I grew up, you know what they talk about even in schools, even for the kids. Oh, you could be a police, you could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer. That's what they say. You want to be a doctor, be a lawyer, or you want to be a police officer, or you want to be in the fire department. And then I joined the military, seeing there were over 200 MOSs. Where are all these jobs from? We're not educated on that. We don't even know the opportunities that exist to us. We don't even know the opportunities that exist to us. That's the issue. The fact that the amendment says that slavery was abolished, except. How do you have abolished but accept? That don't exist. That don't make no sense to me. That's an oxymoron. It's abolished except.
Yeah.
If you're a criminal. If you're a criminal, 3 million slaves in 1865, 2020, how many prisoners? Do the math, the same number.
Or more.
The number, check this out. The average cost for bail in America is the same cost annually to house an inmate. Do the math. Do the math.
Yes. Yes.
The evidence is there.
And I tell you, last week we spoke about privatization in prisons. The prisons now, quite a few are private, and they are making billions of dollars for each young man, for whomever that I call them, they need bodies. And everything came to my head where why so many arrests for no reason? For no reason. And I discovered why is because they need to fill the facility because they're making billions of dollars in these private prisons. And a lot of things that goes with that, because I was talking to our prosecutor yesterday about when somebody has a felony, well, he said that it's changed, and I want him to talk about that you cannot travel, you cannot vote. Many states now change that. Do you want to talk about that, Jakari, and mention it to our audience? Because a lot of times people commit felony, and when they're out of prison, we think that we're going back to a normal life, and that's not so. If I want to leave this country, can I? Let's allow our prosecutor to answer that question.
Certainly. So when you are arrested and
His mic.
Oh, I can't hear you. We can't hear you. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So when you are arrested and charged with committing a felony offense, automatically there are certain restrictions that are placed on you. If you are fortunate enough to be released from custody pending the resolution in your case, you can't travel. In some of those cases, you have to surrender your passport. But the voting rights and things like that, those aren't triggered until you're convicted of that crime. So while you have a felony pending, that doesn't really interfere as much with your rights as opposed to being convicted of that crime. Once you are convicted of a crime, a felony, you are a convicted felon. A lot of people make the mistake of believing that, convicted felons are these very dangerous people that live in the dark of society and things like that. But believe it or not, if you are convicted of driving with your license suspended 3 or more times, that 4th time, that's a felony offense. So if you're convicted of driving a vehicle while you have 3 other convictions of driving that vehicle without a license, you run the risk of being a convicted felon for in my opinion, very minor offense.
But let me just ask this, because I just think it's not right that someone spent 20 years in prison for a felony, and now they're out, they paid their dues, they paid their time in prison, and now there's still restrictions on me that if I want to get the hell out of this country, of all the things that have happened to me, and imagine, what if I was innocent and I want to get out of this country? Why is that restrictions? I think we need to start thinking about changing these laws, because these laws are not really geared towards whites. It's geared towards minority groups in this country, because I paid my dues. I paid 20 years, yet I have to go to a halfway house and live. Then next thing I know, I can't vote. Next thing I know, I can't travel. And there's so many other restrictions, So why now? Eric mentioned something. He said, Well, now we are in positions now that we might be able to change certain things. I think lawyers, prosecutors, mayors, all these politicians that are minorities, these are the things that they need to do. They need to change the law. They need to change the law and not go through the same process as what our ancestors have suffered for. Because we're going through the same thing. And I think this is the time era to do it. But
Well, I think it's two sides to this coin. On the one hand, you have, yes, you may have spent 10, 20 years in prison for a crime that you committed, and now that you're out, you want to vote, you want to be a productive member of society, you want to travel. You have those options now, because last year Amendment 4 was passed, which gives convicted felons the right to have their rights restored. Although there is a process to do that, there is still that option to have your rights restored so that you can vote and you can travel.
For all the states, all the states?
I can't speak for all states. I know that happened in Florida.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
And then on the other side of that coin, yes, you may have spent the last 15 or 20 years in prison, but you have to look at the crime that may have been committed. Because although Amendment 4 was passed, there are exceptions to that amendment that says people convicted of sexual offenses, murderers, they can't have their rights restored. And you have to put yourself in the shoes of that victim or that family member of that loved one. This person may have taken your loved one from you. This person may have taken your innocence from you. This person may have put a scar on your life that you can no longer erase. You can't forget about it. And now they're in a position where they're out, they're free. Do you really want that person to travel? Do you really want that person to be pretty much on the same playing field with you after all that they have done to you? And that's where.
Why release him?
Well, because that gets into an Eighth Amendment. You can't throw someone in prison for the rest of their life for every offense. That's just cruel and unusual.
You know what, Melita?
Go ahead, Eric.
In Chicago, most of the young Black and brown men that are convicted felons are actually convicted felons for nonviolent offenses. And most of them are for possession of drugs, less than 5 grams of drugs. And it actually ends up being a life sentence. And it causes recidivism because once they're frustrated and can't get back into the mainstream, they're put back into the system.
Exactly.
By going back to the streets.
Yes. I just want to say this real quick.
And then I'll get Lurch.
I want to say I like everyone's response to. I like the responses to the votes and the rights and why it's taken away. But I'm just gonna call me foolish. Call me foolish. What do I know? What do I know? but I just want to say this. There's nothing more dangerous than a person who is educated. I mean, truly educated on both sides of the coin. Mm-hmm. Now, if you talk about rights that you're going to take away from the person, why voting? Why is voting that important? It's a vote. You ain't hurting nobody. You can't go to the ballot and cast a vote. You know what? If I was in the position to where people were voting for my position and I was doing things that contributed to the constant recycling of the lack of rehabilitation in those communities, I wouldn't vote that person voting either. Because how do you think they're going to vote? Because they understand now. I understand that some people have broken the law, but come on, we put them in a category box. It ain't all the same. It ain't all the same. Yeah. And then last, why you don't want them to travel? Just like the brother said. Recycling. They ain't worried about other countries' safety. That is not why America don't want them to travel. Yeah. They don't want them to travel because 75% of them reoffend.
That's right.
And that takes away from their multi-billion-dollar annual profits. Then what are you going to do when these people get out of here and say, I had enough America, I'm going abroad? That's why you don't want them to go nowhere. It ain't because you care about other people's countries. America sure don't care about nobody's country. We know that. I've been in the war, okay? You ain't worried about that. 75% people reoffend. You need them here, just like they didn't want the slaves to go nowhere. They don't want us to go nowhere now.
Yes, yes. Mr. Lurch, you've been quiet.
I'm retired.
And then we, oh my goodness, we're past the time. But go ahead, Mr. Lurch.
No, what I wanted to say was, what are we doing to having these young people not to get in contact with the court system, the police department? What are we doing? Because I remember Mr. Brooks, the gentleman just got killed here in Georgia. He mentioned that about probation, that when he went to see his probation, they weren't saying anything about, let me see how I can help you to get a job. I know folks now that are on probation, and all it appears that all probation is concerned about is, hey, you paying your dues every month. Okay, what are we actually doing to try to keep our young people out of the system? I remember back then we used to have what is called a Scared Straight program. I don't know if they have that program anymore, but that program was effective to a certain extent. And I've heard from parents that said their kids went and they was actually scared. It kind of got them back on the right track, you know. So what are we doing? Dr. Hall mentioned about education. We got to educate them now so that they don't have to go in the system. Okay. I missed my other point, but we have to get to them before they get. Oh, that point I want to make was, you mentioned about the laws for us to, now that we're in those positions, to change the laws. It's not going to happen right away. It's going to take a while for those laws to change. Right. Okay. Even with this thing now about abolishing the police department, that's not the answer. That's not going to happen. Okay. Changes definitely need to be made, but abolishing is not going to be the answer. We have to educate our people now to keep them out of the system.
Yes, yes, before they get into the system. And this is why we decided to do the show part 2, because I think it's important for our young people to be educated, not only on basic education, but also the criminal justice system, because where we're going right now, they need to know. And I think every parent need to educate your kids, not just about when a police stop you, but they need to learn the criminal justice system as to what their rights are. You know, that's important. So let's go into closing. I'll give everyone 30 seconds. Give me some type of solution. Give the audience some type of solution to this problem. I know we cannot resolve everything in one day, but give us some type of suggestion as to where we should go from here. Mr. Marshall, 30 seconds.
Well, piggybacking on what Eric said, many of us have been blessed with opportunities, along with Mr. Walker and Mr. Hall and Valdi, yourself and I. And the question I have for all of us is, how many of us go back into those communities, to the schools, speak to young people? I did that almost throughout most of my career in the South Bronx and many areas in New York. Brother Valdi knows that. I run up and down the highway going to these schools, almost pleading my case to these young people. Don't come where I am. Yeah. And we have to take that position that we got to a point where we have an opportunity now. What are we doing with our opportunity? And Eric said it, many black leaders now in Chicago, and he called them by a certain name. I'm not going to repeat, but he's telling the truth. It doesn't matter how you try to describe it. It is the truth. Now, I'm just going to give you a little evidence here. You see, I don't know if you can see what it says on here.
No, I can't see. Read it to us. I can't see.
Okay. This is the rule book for Sing Sing Maximum Security Prison. I'm not bragging. I'm speaking truth. You see my name is on there? You know why?
Yes.
Because once I had my opportunity, I started reviewing the circumstances and the situations and started changing some of the dynamics that it be more fair and equitable for everybody. And the commissioner agreed. Sometimes we have to take a position that I am going to lead the charge. It may cause me a little grief, but so be it. I'm coming in an honest, clear, and concise manner where everybody's going to benefit. So that system, that's some of the little changes I was able to do. And Eric is right. What are many of us doing after we got our little piece of the action? Are we so busy entertaining ourselves that we can't go back? These young people need us back there. Chicago, they need us to go back there and wave at them and say, hey, look, it's possible. I can get out of it.
Prosecutor?
Yes, Dr. Barrow, Dr. Hall, first of all, thank you all for having me on the show. My closing would be, we need more diversity. On this show tonight, we have pretty much law enforcement across the board, retired officers and myself, a prosecutor. Those positions were predominantly held by white men and women at some point in time. But in order to see the change that we so desperately need, we need more Black and brown individuals in these positions so that we can bring to the table our life experiences, our understanding of the environments that we grow up in, and we can have mercy and compassion on these people that find themselves in very unfortunate situations so that we can reduce recidivism and reduce the Black and brown population in our prisons. I'm fortunate and blessed to be in this position. I wake up every morning trying to make a change in my community. And the more individuals we have with the same mentality and aspirations in these types of positions, the more we will begin to see more and more positive change for our people.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lurch.
Yeah, I can only speak from previous law enforcement. What I see would make a difference, like I said, I'm big on community policing. And we need to get back to establishing a relationship between the community and the police. Not a fear of the police, but willing to work with the police. Okay. When I was a police officer, I didn't strive to be move up in ranks. I felt that I would have been, which I have been, more effective from the level of a patrol officer. Everybody that knew me, patrol officer, 31 years of policing, patrol officer, because I look at it from a community perspective that we need to have a relationship with the community.
That's
See,
right.
a lot of people in high positions, captains and chiefs, they don't interact with the community like we do. Okay, they may deal with like the clergy or the businesses, but they're not at the level of the people that's going out working 9 to 5 on a daily basis, have their unruly kids that need to be dealt with. Okay, so looking at it from police law enforcement perspective, we need to build that relationship. I mentioned yesterday about how we used to do the park, walk, and talk. Okay, park the car, get out and walk, and talk to the people in the community. They want to establish a relationship too, but we're going to have to make that step because right now they're looking at us as a bad guy. And we need to build that relationship. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
And I'm honored to be around such distinguished folks.
Eric?
Well, Mel, thanks for having me on and having an opportunity to spend some time with these good brothers and yourself. Listen, I'm putting this out personally from my heart. We're talking about an issue tonight, but this issue is minute. You know, we have the national media now really piling on the police, in my opinion. And this is real simple. Is policing in Black and brown communities a problem? Yep. Okay, let's move on. Because I want to talk about the real issue while they're trying to smokescreen us.
Yes.
The real issues is that it is a institutional and systemic problem. It is systemic in the lack of education they give us, the lack of investment that comes to our community, what politicians, local, state, and federally do or don't do for our communities, and big businesses now who all of a sudden are writing hundreds of millions of dollars in checks and putting on their websites, we're with you, Black Lives Matters. But Black Lives didn't matter about 8 weeks ago, or 3 years ago, or 5 years ago, when all of this was still occurring.
That's right.
I really want us to say, hey, are the police a problem? The police are a problem. And you know,
okay, Eric? I think Eric, and he was, okay, don't go.
I was ready to hear.
We need.
Come on back, Eric. Come on back,
truth be
Eric.
told, in Chicago.
There you go.
There you go.
Uh-oh.
Come on, Eric. You can do it.
Come on, Eric. I'm not going to cut off until you speak. Come on, brother.
Oh, man.
In the food
man.
chain, the police department.
You got cut off there, so you got to start.
So thank you for having me, Mel.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. No, finish. We want you to finish.
You were cut off, brother. You got to go back about halfway in.
When you start talking about the police officers, you got cut off. Is this you working?
Eric, can you hear me?
Can
you hear me, Eric? Yeah, I don't think you can hear me.
Oh, man.
Eric, can you hear me, Eric?
I can see you.
Nah, he can't hear you. Can't hear you. All right.
Oh, we're gonna go with you. Don't go anywhere, Eric. You stay right there. We're gonna go with this. Can you hear me now, Eric? No. You can go ahead with your conclusion, and hopefully he'll come back. Go ahead, Dr. Hall.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm just grateful to be here. I really am. You know, just to be having this conversation with you all. You know, because I'm still very deep in my community and tied to the people there in the life. I got a lot of people back there still in their life, and I refuse to leave behind. You know, I refuse to leave behind. So just to sit up here and have this conversation with you all who sit in the positions that you do, I mean, that itself is growth and change, because it's something that you won't always see. Because I'm telling you now, I probably don't know too many people personally that would sit here and have this conversation with this panel. But we need to, and I do, because I've been liberated to understand that the position that you sit in is you know, you're not the enemy, you know, because of what you do. And there's a lot of people out here trying to do some great things, just like you don't look at me and see my image and say he's the enemy. And I think dialogues like this is more of what we need. I do think we need, because we're hurting on my side of the fence. I know you're working tirelessly on your side of the fence. And the way we're going to come together is to show that these type of dialogues are possible, and that's okay. You know, not the people that present well and look nice and they're using the fancy words, but the people like us who are connected. We need to have these conversations, and these conversations need to be seen so they can be populated. Definitely.
Eric, you got cut off, and we really need to hear what you had to say. So you were in the middle. You gotta go back. We need to hear this.
No, we do.
No, I love you.
Yeah.
Come on back. Come on. Finish what you were saying.
I think most police officers that work here in Chicago are good police officers and do the right thing. There's an element that does the wrong thing, and that's just not in Chicago. That's in every city. Mm-hmm. And I just think that we have to remember, we have to go after the whole tree here, not just the lowest limb. And the police department is the lowest limb. Yeah. We have to hold the media accountable for what they present us as. We have to hold big business accountable for never investing in our community, but wanting our money all the time.
That's right.
We have to hold our schools accountable, because we know that the key is education, yet you don't give our children an education and an opportunity to be their greatest self educationally, because you know that if they don't get those things, if they don't live in proper housing, if they live in an infested community, they're probably going to end up in your system. And right now, the criminal justice system is slavery.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
How it's always been.
Awesome. But I want to thank all of you, Mr. Marshall, Mr. Walker, Mr. Lurch, Dr. Hall, and definitely Eric Davis. I thank you. We spoke this afternoon, and I said, you have to be on my show. Come on. And thank you for accepting.
Yes, she did.
Also,
She did.
Mr. Eric, he moved to Panama once I told him everything about Panama. And he lives in Panama also. That's why he was telling me all this stuff. And he also works in Panama. He also have an organization. Please tell us about your organization, because when he retired, he continued his work in the city of Chicago. Could you tell us some more about the organization that you started in the city of Chicago with the youth, please?
Certainly. I'm the executive director of an organization called the Base Chicago, and we use academics and athletics, and I say that in that order with intention. We have an organization where all the kids come, and they come because they want to be in the NBA, play MLB, or be in the NFL. They want to go to the league. And we want them to go to the league too. And we're hard pushing them to the league, except the league we're trying to send them to is the Ivy League. And what we do with our kids is this: we give them a great athletic experience, but they have to pay a tuition by coming and being tutored, coming for SAT prep, for 8th grade enhancement, for reading, for any tutoring that they need. They must show up to participate in our athletic training. And then what we do in the summer, Mel, is we take them all across the country, because many of my kids, it's not even fair to say they're from the West Side. They're from a block or 2 or 3 blocks. Last year, we took our children to New York and Boston and Pittsburgh and Indy. This year, before COVID-19 hit, we were going to take them to the West Coast and take them to Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and New Mexico. We have great aspirations for our children. I currently have 362 of them. I got cut off because they were calling me to get on a Zoom with them to talk about hitting a curveball. And, for me, I think not only do we have to hold people accountable who institutionally have got us in the position that we're in and refuse to let us out of esclavitud, I think that we also have to have conversations within our Black community about what we need to do, and particularly as Black brothers, in embracing fatherhood and manhood. And you know what? We have some tough conversations that we have to have and be consistent within our community for this to be better for the next generation.
Thank you, everyone. I want to thank my audience for watching. There's so many people that tuned in.
This is awesome.
You guys. One of the final things I would like to say is that we need to start working together. We need to start having these tough conversations, and conversations that sometimes we don't want to ask because it might make somebody feel uncomfortable. No, on this show, we are going to ask the difficult questions because we need to resolve these type of situations. And we said that we was going to attack Dakari, the prosecutor. So we were very nice to you, Mr. Walker, and thank you so much for being patient with us. But the thing I even want to say on here is that Dr. And he said, I want to ask these tough questions, but I don't know what you might think about it. I'm like, you go right ahead, because we need to continue to solve the problems. You understand? And we need to create the solutions, because this show, I want everyone that's watching, if you have any situation in your community, in your country, because I'm connecting Africa, the diaspora, the world, we need to start communicating with each other. My African brothers and sisters, I need you to call us when you need to be on this show so we can come together and work together, because your children are going through the same things that the American children going through, the Panamanian children going through, Jamaica, all over the world. This is the time for us to change and change our mindset. It starts from here, because guess what? We're all brothers and sisters, all of us. So this is the time. I love you guys. Thank you for watching.
You too.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Thank you, and everybody wear your mask.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Love y'all.
Okay.